Hi everyone, thanks again for watching. I just wanted to go over a few different things that doesn't seem to be discussed extremely well in the knife industry today. That would be knife nitpicks. Now, we all have our different nitpicks of things we like and dislike in knives, and that's what makes the industry so vast with so many different options to choose from. But I'm talking about specific things that I believe are detriments to a knife, flaws, things that could be fixed or worked on or rectified from the maker or the production company. I just want to go over some of them. I'll say the first one, and I'm going to use right now the R.J. Martin and Three Rivers Manufacturing machine. Listen to that action, man. I'm going to do that again. You know, if you didn't know this, R.J. Martin actually hand-tuned. This was made by Three Rivers Manufacturing in Massachusetts. And R.J. actually hand-tuned and sharpened every single one of these. So it really is like a mid-tech or semi-custom, if you want to call it that, but truly superb work. So anyway, first nitpick. When the blade, you can't really see it here because it has a G10 backspacer. I'll try to get the camera to focus. If the blade happens to come through the back of the handle scale here, you can easily cut yourself on it. Now, I can't do it with this knife. I used to have a particular knife that did do that. That was actually the Craig Brown Exponent. I wound up selling it. That was one of the reasons. All right. I don't believe there's any reason as to why a blade should be poking through the bottom of the handle scale. If you reach into your pocket, if you slide your hand past it to grab your keys, or if you have your keys in the same pocket, depending, or pen, chapstick, whatever the case is, that can be a detriment. It can be dangerous, and you might slit your hand open, and it's just something that I would prefer not to see in a knife. Now, I'll use this as the next example. The next nitpick I would have to say is the tip of the blade being too close to the scale. So a lot of people love to focus on that 1-to-1 blade to handle ratio, excuse me. I understand that, although I don't place as much emphasis on it as some do. Now, in my Gavco Nurse here, the custom, this, I cannot put my finger down far enough. Did I? No, I don't think so. No, I don't believe so. Anyway, I can't put my finger down far enough into this handle scale in order to cut myself. However, and I will say this is one of the nitpicks from this knife, although it is a very good knife, I'm mindful of it. If I were to just put my finger carefully grazing it against the back of the handle scale, I can feel the tip of the blade poking out because it is so close. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. It is very close. You can almost lift your finger with this, but not because the D10 is so strong. And I have cut myself with this, not intentionally, more knowingly. But it's something that, yes, you have to be mindful of it, and I am. But sometimes I don't carry this knife because of that very reason. It's something that I believe could be fixed just by maybe shortening the blade a little bit or increasing the length of the handle scales just a skosh, maybe 1/8 of an inch would solve that problem. But this is how some of these makers make knives. I'm just pointing out a few things that I don't preferably care for because I don't want to cut myself. I know this has been covered by a few different people. I know Gideon's Tactical actually spoke about a production company who he had this problem with, and they fixed it for him. But it seems to be evident and prevalent on some of the knives out there that a lot of people like. Now, on the This is my Demco full size 8020 CPM 3V, full flat ground, very nice edge. It's what they call the yellow number 2. Very good handle ergonomics. Now, this really doesn't have any nitpicks that I am concerned with. None of the ones I just mentioned. But I wanted to mention the next order of business is lock, failure, or slip as a nitpick. Excuse me. If a lock fails or slips, and this is preferably geared more toward frame locks, then you really have an issue. This has a pretty early lockup, I would say maybe, 15, 20%, give or take. And I have tested this before. I'm going to show you on camera. I have a piece of block of wood here. You can see all the times that I have tested knives on all of the edges of this block of wood to test the locked strength. Most people wouldn't do this. My hands are not on the lock bar. Okay, you can see where they're being held. I'll even put it on the clip so I have a little more leverage. Now, most people wouldn't do this with their knives, guys. Look at that. Solid. And from what I can tell, this does not have a lock bar insert. You know, a lot of people also stress that, which I think I'll probably get to later on. We'll see if I was on the list. Regardless, this is something that is very important. You know, if a lock slips or fails, you could cut your hand open. You could do some serious damage. It's not something I would want to take the risk at because of aesthetics or you like the look of a knife. The knife has to lock. The lock has to be secure. It can't fail. It shouldn't fail. Yes, things fail. But under normal use and even some hard use, it should not fail you. It's meant to lock and to not close on your hands. I would say that another nitpick is knives that have edges that are way too thick behind the edge. Now, this has been stressed by several. It seems most of the enthusiasts who are into custom-made knives appreciate this more than production company enthusiasts. But, and I'll just give this as an example, going back to the Gavco. Now, the Gavco is a very nice knife. It's very sharp as it came from the maker. But man, is this thick behind the edge. I mean, you can almost just tell by the bevel. It's got some meat behind it. And I mean, granted, if you were prying, maybe it would hold up, but I don't generally pry with my knives. It's something that a lot of custom makers focus on this a lot more than production knife makers, but still, there are custom knife makers who do not focus on it enough. And it's something that I believe should be addressed more. Now, not on screen, I have my GTK small spear tack, and this knife is very thin behind the edge. I mean, extremely thin. And it will cut extremely well. And that's what a knife is supposed to be used for, right? To be cutting, not really prying or battering it through a 2x4. I'm not suggesting you do this with any of your folder knives. But at the same time, if you needed to use the knife to get you out of a situation, like prying something open, maybe a door, then you want it to hold up. And I understand it's the tool you have with you at the time. The best tool you have is the one on you. Some people might disagree with that, but it's better to have something than nothing. Some people will carry 2 knives rather than 1 because, as the saying goes, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. just remember, guys, that geometry cuts. Yes, you can make a sharp edge with anything, with a pry bar, right? A chisel. You can make a sharp edge on anything. But how long is it going to hold up? Because if the geometry is like this, it's quite wide when you're trying to cut through material. But if you thin it down, boy, is that thing just going to glide right through whatever it's cutting. And I believe a lot of makers, both production especially, and custom knife makers should focus on it a lot more. Now, I believe Spyderco does a very good job of this, and I really like Spyderco. It's one of my favorite production companies, if not my favorite. One of my favorite models. NX2, lightweight. This is in CPM Rex 45. Wonderful knife. Great steel so far, from what I've seen. Now, they have their knives at a degree, it's around, or I should say a thickness behind the edge of around anywhere from, I'll say 18 thousandths up to 26 thousandths, give or take, depending on the model. That's not bad, but I believe they could get it thinner. And I'm not just talking about Spyderco, I'm talking about Benchmade, I'm talking about Cold Steel, I'm talking about Hogue, any of the other knife manufacturing companies that you like. I believe they should bring them down to 15%, excuse me, I misspoke again, sorry, 15 thousandths behind the edge, 10 thousandths behind the edge. Something like that is going to make a much better difference in cutting. And you'll notice, too, this is the first production Grant and Gavin Hawk shortcut. Beautiful custom piece. Very happy to snag my very first one. Anyway, I was using this as an example. This uses just standard box cutter razor blades. These are already thin enough behind the edge. And you don't see chipping in these normally, do you? Unless you're cutting through very hard material, but I mean, people use that for sheetrock and all types of stuff. And that's 1095 carbon steel, generally speaking. So if a razor blade or a box cutter itself is thin enough behind the edge that's used to cut carpet and all types of things, it's been used for years, why can't production and custom, why can't these companies, makers, produce knives that have thin edges that can also cut just as well? Because let me tell you something, guys, geometry cuts, and I've learned a lot from Dr. Larrin Thomas on this, and Sean Houston, Big Brown Bear. Go check those guys out. They have a wealth of knowledge, exceptionally more than me. Matter of fact, I would say that most of the things that I've learned about geometry, blade steels, heat treatment is from those guys. Highly recommend, if you haven't heard of either of them, to check them out. KnifeSteelNerds.com, Big Brown Bear, or Triple B Handmade on YouTube. I would say next thing I have on the list is squared off edges. Now, none of the knives I really have any squared off edges. Here's just the custom bug out for a moment. All the edges are pretty much knocked down, right? They're chamfered, pretty contoured. Maybe this is a better example. Hold on. See that? All beautifully contoured, chamfered, no sharp edges. So when you hold on to this knife, you're really not going to notice a lot of hot spots. That's something that is not focused on entirely. Depends on the maker, depends on the production company. Now, I think, honestly, Benchmade does a pretty good job as far as handle ergonomics. They have other issues with heat treatment and bad grinds and what have you from the factory, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not trying to pick on Benchmade. I'm just saying from my experience in using them as an example. Chamfers and contouring on knives, I believe, is very important. The only real sharp edge that should be on a knife is the edge bevel itself. Okay? Now, another thing that drives me nuts. This is probably a really good one. Good nitpick. Apart from the thickness behind the edge, that was the probably number one nitpick I had. But the next one is dull edges from the maker or the production company. There is no reason why any knife that you buy, I don't care if it's $20, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $2,000, that any knife that you buy has a dull edge. Period. There's no reason for it. People can argue that point and say, well, learn how to sharpen. True, not everyone knows how to sharpen very well. And yes, there's tutorials and a lot of good information out there, and that's helpful. However, when you're paying for something like that, especially a high dollar amount, there's no reason why it shouldn't be sharp. And I see this more often with different companies, and even some custom makers I've seen have this issue. But that knife should be sharp right off the gate, right off the bat, right out of the gate, I should say. I would say that the next nitpick is no jimping or too smooth a jimping. Now, let's see if I have a good example here. I'll just go back to my Mannix here. Mannix, I believe, has fantastic jimping. Then again, it is a Spyderco, and most Spydercos have excellent jimping. It just really locks in your thumb, and you can go to work. You have the forward finger choil. I mean, it's a great production knife. One of my favorite. If the jimping is too smooth, okay, here's an example. Great knife, but I mean, this jimping is kind of useless. Yes, it's there. It's better than nothing, but not by a whole lot. And let me tell you guys, if you're using something like a tool under hard use, because some people do use their knives. I know some might find that hard to believe. Not everybody goes out and buys a $100 Spyderco or a $50 Spyderco or a $20 or $10, I don't even know what they cost, Walmart knife, okay, and beat on their knives. Some people go out and buy high-end production, high-end customs, and beat on their knives a little bit. Not abuse, but they will definitely use them. And with that said, if you have jimping that is too slick, if you have machining that is too slick, like even on my custom bug out, I might sell this because the titanium is nice, but it's a little too smooth. Even in and out of the pocket, I could see myself losing this. And these go for like $500. The configuration that I have, I use S90V, full titanium, yellow anodized thumb studs and spacers. That would be a lot of money to lose on a knife because the knife is too slick and it can fall out of your pocket or easily catch on something. I don't know about you, but I prefer something with a little more traction. And if I'm using my knife, I don't want it to slip out of my hand, so I'd rather have my hand maybe have a blister or two than it fall out of my hand and cut me, or worse. Now, the next nitpick I would have to say is blade play or lock rock. Okay. Then my R.J. Martin with Three Rivers Manufacturing, even with all that, actually, hold on, does that? That's just flex. It's different. Hold on. Now, that's solid. That's really solid. And I'm one of those people that if a blade has just the slightest hint of lock rock in that way, in that fashion, I generally will sell it or not buy it if I notice it ahead of time. Some people think there's acceptable lock rock. You can actually see this on some of the blade forums online. They seem not to care if their knife has a potential for failure. And I just don't see the logic in that. That's like saying, well, you know what? I'm driving a car down the road and it doesn't matter that the tires are flat. I'm just going to keep driving and expect it to do its job. It might be a poor example off the cuff, but I think you get my drift. Now, here's another nitpick. Lock bar, too sharp to disengage. And this kind of goes into sharp lock bar edges as well. Now this, I'm just going to go back to this again, the machine. This does not have sharp disengagement. It actually has very nice disengagement. The way they finish this titanium, everything is rounded, contoured, chamfered. It's very nicely done. All right. The pocket clip is a little bit of an annoyance, but neither here nor there. I've considered selling this, though. I just can't get over that action. It is stellar. And until I can buy my first custom RJ Martin, it's probably going to stay in the collection. Now, with that said, this knife, ooh, wow, I made that fail. This never fails. That's crazy. Well, that's another issue. There's no jimping on the back of the flipper tab, guys. That's just, I mean, RJ, from what I've seen, all of his knives or knife designs doesn't have jimping, but I prefer some jimping. Anyway, this particular knife, oh, that's what I meant to show you. Around the edges here, you really can't tell, but underneath, lock bar cutout is, this was kind of sharp from the factory, and I actually had to take some emery cloth, some high grit sandpaper, and smooth out the edges. I talked to RJ about it at Blade Show, and he appreciated the feedback greatly. I mean, that man is very humble, and he's not above reproach. So that was important that he heard me out when I expressed that concern to him and what he suggested for me to fix it. But you'll notice that some makers can make a beautiful knife and they will have the best quality details, but they'll miss something as simple as that. And when you have a sharp edge around there, I mean, it's just, when you're at that 99th percentile and then you miss that 1% of something that could have been absolutely excellent, I wonder why people don't place more emphasis on it. So that's another nitpick that I would have to say is annoying. I know we're going on about 23 and a half minutes here, but I just want to finish up the last few that I had. Blade centering. Blade centering is huge. All right. See that? That's centered very nicely. With technology nowadays, guys, there's no reason why blade centering should not be perfect. Now the grind is off on this Benchmade a little. I don't know if you can tell. Hold on, focus the camera. Let's see. That's pretty centered. Blade centering. Yeah, there's really no reason that blade centering should be off to one side or another. I'm just going to show you the Gavco one more time. If you look at it closely, it almost looks like it's off-centered based on how much gap is in between this scale on that side of the blade and this scale on that side of the blade. The way this is actually centered, and I've had this looked at and even examined by another person in the industry who's been around for a long time. The grind on the blade is just a little off. That's what makes it look so off-centered, because Michael Gavick, as you know, does everything by hand with his knives. So same as Allen Elishewitz, they both use lathes, hand tools, mills, grinders, things of that nature. They don't use any CNC. They use no CAD programs, nothing like that. And so I can understand why that blade might have been ground a little unevenly. But something like that was not a huge deal on this particular model, just due to the fact that I know it was hand done, so I kind of give it a little bit of a pass. But then again, like I said, it's not off center. If something was off center, I really don't have an example here because if I can't get a blade to be centered, it's not the biggest deal in the world. Lockup is more important, but it's still something that gets me, so I'll normally sell it if it has that issue. And at this given time, I would have to say my last nitpick would be, let's see, we went over 1, 2, 3. I guess this is the 11th one because I combined the last one about the sharp lock bar edges. Clip positioning, whether deep carry clip, non-deep carry clip, milled or spring clip. All right. I don't know about you guys, but I have become very accustomed, and I really like this clip on my Spear Tack, to a milled pocket clip. It's beautiful. It's functional. It is so much more comfortable in the hand. I mean, this one, I can't even feel the pocket clip. That's how well done it is. It's fantastic. And I believe milled pocket clips are exceptional. Some of the best in the business, bar none. Now, the bug out, I'll just use again. Oh, speaking of like slick surfaces, these thumb studs, I don't know why, but I have slipped with these surfaces more times than I can count. And I mean, I'm not a novice at this either, but I prefer the thumb studs on the Hogue RSK MK1G2 Ritter Hogues because they're a little sharper around the edges and they just grab your finger very well. Some people complain about that, but you know what? Suck it up, Buttercup. Why don't you toughen up those soft hands? Actually use your knives, not just keep them in a case. Anyway, I'm not going to go on a rant there. For something like the Demko 8020, yes, this is a spring clip. I do prefer milled pocket clips, as I said. The thing I like about this is it doesn't have a real huge ramp. The Gavco has a minimal ramp, which is nice. It doesn't stick up too much. Some are very obnoxious. Let me see if I had one that, I'm trying to remember if that has a little bit, it has a little bit more, but it also, you can see look how wide this is for a pocket clip. How much gap is in between. That's why it's kind of a hot spot on this RJ Martin machine. Anyway, clip positioning, where it's placed. Even though this is a spring clip, it doesn't sit too high, but you can notice there is some space in between. When I put this in hand and kind of bear down, I really don't notice it all that much. I more notice, some of the gap in between the handles. That's the way it's designed. But when I bear down, I generally don't notice the pocket clip here because of the way that it's positioned. It just kind of goes into the palm of your hand and swell where you're gripping and squeezing and bearing down on it, that you notice other things more so than the handle, than the pocket clip itself. But clip positioning is paramount. Some makers don't put enough emphasis on this. Oh, with the bug out, let me go back to that. I think I lost my train of thought when I was explaining the bug out and I put it down because I went on a little bit of a rant. This particular pocket clip, the small, I was not in frame, sorry. Small deep carry pocket clip works very well, but some knives, and this one, you can really feel it if you bear down. It's not horrendous. I've had worse, but I prefer I prefer a milled clip over a spring clip overall. Now, it does have to do with positioning of where that clip is. Like I said, the Demko has a fantastically positioned pocket clip. Some people like deep carry, some people don't. I like deep carry, and then I also like clips that are not deep carry. So it's personal preference. I mean, generally, I just like a well-done pocket clip, to be honest. And it doesn't really matter to me a whole lot about the positioning. I used to be one of those people who was more deep carry than anything, although at work, something like that is a lot more important because where I work, I'm not sure if you're even allowed to have something like that on you. So I try to be more discreet, which is why I'll carry something like the Mannix, and I added a deep carry pocket clip, which fits perfectly. And this particular clip fits the knife perfectly from the Spyderco Foundry. And I gotta say, I mean, you can see that only about that much sticks out. And when it's in your pocket, you can almost get it to disappear to where people don't even see it. I actually spoke to Eric Glesser about them making a deep carry pocket clip like the Spyderco Foundry's pocket clip for the Mannix 2. And he had looked at it and observed it and appreciated the feedback, but I'm sure they get a lot of feedback, so there's only so much that they will accommodate. Although, thank you, Spyderco, for producing such well-made, high-quality production-made knives. And to all the other makers that I mentioned here, very much appreciate your products, and I just had to use some of these as examples. I couldn't really think of any others off the top of my head. If there's something else that I missed, feel free to leave it down in the comments. What is your biggest nitpick about knives in general? What is something that drives you up a wall when you're carrying a knife or not? Is there a reason why you don't carry a particular knife because of... Name the reason. I'd be happy to hear your comments. Any suggestions, thoughts, throw them down in the comments below, and I'll be happy to get back to you. And I think that's all I have at this moment. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. All right? See you next time. Thank you guys again. Take care.